For decades, the United States did not try to reinvent the aircraft carrier. It simply kept building the same one. The Nimitz-class carrier entered service in the 1970s, and for a long time it worked extraordinarily well. It became the backbone of American naval power, carrying U.S. air power across the world's oceans through the Cold War, regional conflicts, and into the early years of the 21st century. So the question isn't why the U.S. Navy replaced it. The real question is why the Navy decided it was no longer enough. Because when the Gerald R. Ford-class aircraft carrier was approved, the decision wasn't to upgrade an old design. It was to tear the blueprint apart and start over. That kind of choice doesn't happen lightly. Aircraft carriers are among the most complex machines ever built. They take more than a decade to design and construct. They are expected to serve for half a century. And once a design is locked in, it shapes naval strategy for generations. For most of modern history, the United States avoided unnecessary risk with carriers. Evolution, not revolution, was the rule, until it wasn't. By the early 2000s, a problem was becoming impossible to ignore. The Nimitz-class carriers were powerful, but they were designed for a different world. They relied on systems created in an era before digital warfare, before massive data fusion, and before electrical power became the backbone of modern combat systems. Each upgrade required workarounds. New systems were added, but the ship itself was never designed to support them easily. Power margins were tight, crew sizes were large, maintenance demands kept growing. The carriers still worked, but they were approaching the limits of what their design could handle. At the same time, the nature of warfare was changing. Naval combat was no longer just about aircraft and missiles. It was about sensors, networks, electronic warfare, and information dominance. Ships were becoming nodes in vast systems, not standalone platforms. The U.S. Navy faced a choice. It could continue extending the life of a design created in the 1960s, or it could accept the cost and risk of starting fresh. The Gerald R. Ford class was the answer to that decision. From the beginning, the Ford class was not built to solve today's problems alone. It was built to create space for future solutions. That idea drove nearly every major design decision. The most important change was invisible: power. Previous carriers generated enough electricity for the systems they carried, but very little more. The Ford class was designed with massive excess electrical capacity, not because the Navy knew exactly what future systems would require, but because it knew they would require more. Advanced radar, electronic warfare, high-powered sensors, and future defensive systems all depend on electricity. By redesigning the ship around power generation, the Navy ensured that the carrier would not be trapped by its own limits 20 years down the line. The same logic applied to aircraft operations. Traditional steam catapults had served carriers for decades, but they were mechanically complex and demanding to maintain. They were also optimized for a narrower range of aircraft. Instead of refining them further, the Ford class introduced electromagnetic launch technology. This wasn't just a technical upgrade. It was a structural change that affected how aircraft are launched, how often they can fly, and how the air wing can evolve over time. It allowed smoother launches, greater control, and the ability to handle aircraft that didn't yet exist when the carrier was designed. That same mindset shaped the flight deck itself. The layout was redesigned to reduce congestion, speed up aircraft movement, and increase sortie generation. The goal wasn't spectacle, it was efficiency. More aircraft in the air, with fewer delays using fewer people. Which brings us to one of the most controversial aspects of the Ford class: crew size. Despite being more advanced than any carrier before it, the Gerald R. Ford requires significantly fewer sailors to operate. Automation replaced manual processes. Digital monitoring reduced the need for constant human oversight. Maintenance systems were redesigned to be faster and more predictable. Over a 50-year service life, this change matters. Personnel costs dominate long-term military spending. Reducing crew size doesn't just save money, It reduces logistical strain, training demands, and operational fatigue. It also makes sustained deployments more manageable. This was not about cutting corners. It was about acknowledging reality. Modern warfare is fought by systems, not sheer manpower. Another reason the Navy chose to rebuild the carrier from scratch was adaptability. Older carriers were upgraded by necessity, but those upgrades were often constrained by the original design. The Ford class was built with modularity in mind. Systems could be replaced or upgraded without tearing apart the ship. This matters because no one can predict what naval warfare will look like in 2040 or 2050. The Navy doesn't need a carrier that is perfect today. It needs one that won't become obsolete tomorrow. That philosophy explains why the Ford class faced so many challenges during development. Pushing multiple new technologies into a single platform increases risk. Delays and cost overruns followed. Critics questioned whether the Navy had taken on too much at once. But stepping back, the logic becomes clearer. If the United States had built another incremental upgrade of the Nimitz class, it would have locked itself into the past. Instead, it chose uncertainty now in exchange for flexibility later. That choice reflects a deeper strategic reality. Aircraft carriers are not built for wars that are easy to predict. They are built for the ones that are not. Their value lies not just in combat, but in presence, deterrence, and response speed. A carrier doesn't need permission to operate. It doesn't rely on foreign bases. It moves with its own infrastructure, air power, and command capability wherever it is needed. But to remain relevant, it must evolve. The Gerald R. Ford class represents an admission that the old formula, while successful, could not simply be extended forever. The Navy did not rebuild the carrier because the old one failed. It rebuilt it because the future demanded something different. That is the key point often missed in debates about cost and complexity. The Ford class is not an answer to a single threat. It is a platform designed to absorb change. It is a carrier built for a world where technology shifts faster than shipbuilding cycles, where warfare is increasingly defined by information, power, and integration rather than raw numbers. In that sense, rebuilding the aircraft carrier was not a gamble. It was an acknowledgement of reality. The United States didn't replace the Nimitz class because it was weak. It replaced it because even the strongest designs eventually reach their limits. The Gerald R. Ford exists because the Navy chose to confront those limits early, rather than wait until they became unavoidable. And that decision may shape American sea power for the rest of this century.